The KindlED podcast is brought to you by Prenda. Prenda can help you start and run an amazing microschool. For more information, go to prenda.com.
I'm not going to go learn geometry just to learn geometry, right? I might learn some geometry if I need to like do a carpentry project or something. I'm like, oh, how do I measure these angles again? Let me refresh myself on that. But it needs to be tied to a real goal I have or a real objective I have. So I think helping kids think about learning the same way it might feel imposed like arbitrarily that you have to learn these things, but let's think through where you want to go and what you want to do. And so we help each kid set goals. And then what we help them reflect on is think through like, okay, at my current pace, am I on track to meet those goals? Am I going to finish those goals early? Or am I lagging behind those goals? And why?
Hi, and welcome to the KindlED podcast, where we dig into the art and science behind kindling the motivation, curiosity, and mental well-being of the young humans in our lives.
Together, we'll discover practical tools and strategies you can use to help kids unlock their full potential and become the strongest version of their future selves. Welcome to the KindlED podcast. Hey, Katie, what are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking to Caleb Collier, who is a good friend of mine and one of the, I'm going to say like the nation's leading experts on self-directed learning, honestly. He's a truly amazing guy, and I'm super excited that we get some time with him today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him now. Caleb is a storyteller, academic, educator, and writing coach. He has a PhD in teaching and learning, is a co-founder of the Forest School, serves as the director at the Institute for Self-Directed Learning, which he helped create, and has been a research fellow at the University of Virginia. He has published extensively in academic journals and is the author of Theoretical and Historical Evolutions of Self-Directed Learning, The Case for Learner-Led Education. I wish that someday I will be smart enough to write a book with that title in it. But I don't need to be because it already got written by Caleb.
And we're going to find out that they are writing a new book too that's going to be really easy to digest for educators and parents, and a playbook to how to do this whole self-directed education thing, because it can seem daunting of like, wait, my kid just teaches himself or herself. Like, how does that work? So super excited to talk to Caleb today and cannot wait to learn how to do this thing called self-directed education.
Let's do it. Caleb, welcome to the KindlED podcast. We're super excited to have you today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with y'all.
So I'm really interested in your work around self-directed education, but we'll get into that later. I want to hear a little bit more about your background. Like, what is your story? How did you come into this work? What is your big why? What change are you seeking to make in the world? Like, kind of zoom out and give me the big picture.
Well, I came into this particular form of education just from teaching. I was a middle school teacher for 10 years or ish, going on nearly a decade. And over time, I just felt like a lot of my job was managing kids, just kind of making kids do what we needed them to do, and moving them through these processes. And it was just a little disheartening over time. So that led me to do a couple of things. So one, I went back to school myself, and started doing PhD work in the field of education, studying self-directed learning and learner-led education models. So I started, learning myself about all that's out there, theoretically, historically, pedagogically, in the field. Then I connected with a guy named Tyler Thigpen, who was starting the Forest School here south of Atlanta. Randomly, we just randomly connected, and I heard his vision for starting a learner-led micro school close by, and I said, "Hey, I want in." And I was the first hire of the school, and we co-launched that in 2018. I led the middle school program for a few years while doing my doctoral work, and then having finished my PhD, moved into doing more education research. And so out of the Forest School, we stood up a institute called the Institute for Self-Directed Learning. We see the school as kind of a lab school where we can, be there and tinker and learn what works and what doesn't work. And through our learnings, we can share out more broadly with the field of those interested in learner-led models, hopefully some practical wisdom and some tips. And some advice on how to move forward in this type of learning.
Yeah. So something you said caught my attention. You said we were trying to get the kids in the traditional model, trying to get them to learn what we needed them to learn. And I think that that's like very telling. Like we're trying to get kids to learn what we think they need to learn. So how does that contrast with how you approach self-directed learning?
Yeah, so it's kind of flipping that direction, right? So I think a lot of traditional education starts at kind of increasingly top down, right? So here are these standards that exist up in the sky that we just made up. They're arbitrary, but those are then forced down on school systems and on principals and on teachers and then on students, right? So it's kind of coming from top down. No one has a whole lot of freedom in a traditional model. It's all kind of dictated from on high. Whereas in a learner-led model, you're starting here, right? You're starting with the individual and then what the individual has interest in learning. And then you're moving outward from there, right? And so they're going out to gather resources, which might include educators, which might include curriculum, it might include books, might include technology. But all of that stuff is kind of aiding and abetting the learner learn what they want to learn, what they're interested in learning. So it's that kind of change in direction, I think, is the big difference between traditional models and learner-led models.
Yeah. So we talk a little bit sometimes about unschooling. Is this the same as unschooling? How does it, how does this stack up against unschooling? Are self-directed learning and unschooling the same thing, or do we tease them apart at all? What are your thoughts about that?
I think there's a big umbrella. And I think under that umbrella, you can use terms like self-directed learning, learner-led education, learner-centered learning, unschooling, deschooling. And all of those will have different emphasis, right? Different points of I think they can be differentiated. But I think the commonality is a centering of the individual, a centering of the learner and the learning project. And I think where there would be differences is it completely on the individual to learn? Is there, what is the environment like that the individual is in? What are the accountability measures in place? Those sorts of things along the way. But I think there's enough commonality to kind of put them in a pocket together of alternative education. And I think often, what I've seen in the field is the infighting can get ugly between like, no, this is how education's done. No, this is how education's done. And I don't think there is one way. I think, the beautiful thing about, I think, where we're kind of moving in education is more and more options are popping up. And I think we see that there are multiple ways to educate.
And we're realizing that students' interests matter. And it's not just about, like what Katie said, just teaching them what we think or what adults think or what whoever created these standards think that a child should learn. We are seeing this shift in really looking at like the why and purpose-driven living, purpose-driven learning as well. So I would love to dive a little deeper into what sparked your interest in the self-directed learning, because you said you were just managing children. So what happened between that, like leaving being a middle school teacher to going into your doctoral program, and why self-directed education? Like what sparked that for you?
It was a combination of just being interested on my part, being a little bit disillusioned with traditional education, feeling inadequate too in traditional education. Like it was on me if learners did not learn, and kind of wrestling with that for years of like, oh, I'm a terrible teacher. And realizing, oh, maybe it's the questions more than that.
Can I interject there really quick? Because we talk all the time about grades and the way traditional education is set up that affects the learner and affects the student in having these limited beliefs that they're not a good student. But what I'm hearing you say, this is happening for the teachers as well. And because there's so much pressure on them to get this content into these minds and, into these kids, that then you start having these limiting beliefs that you're not a good teacher either.
Yeah, I think so. And so I think it's kind of this, this lack of agency and also just self-efficacy around teachers are feeling that, and I think students are feeling that too. So I was kind of feeling these things and thinking these things. I started going back to school and studying these things, kind of at a academic level. But then opportunity, I just kind of made a chance encounter with someone that was starting a learner-led school, and that really kind of accelerated my own growth and learning, building the plane while flying it, and trying to figure out how do we do self-directed education, because it's messy, it's complicated, it's not easy, and kind of learning as I went.
I love that. You said something a minute ago that I thought was interesting. Even in the alternative education world, like there's kind of the traditional model sometimes is referred to as like a one size fits all approach. And then we get into the alternative education world, and you said there's a lot of infighting, and it's like we're all trying to like say like this is the new one size fits all, like this is the thing that I feel the most passionate about. When really like there's a wide umbrella, like you've mentioned, and that student agency is like a spectrum where like a lot of learner-led models can fall along the spectrum, based on whether like what else are you doing to kind of encourage learning and create the culture. What does the space feel like, the accountabilities, all of that. Really, in my mind, a spectrum is kind of how I picture. Is that how you envision it too, or do you have a different way of thinking about that?
Yeah, no, I think we do see it on a spectrum, and we see there's a variety of categories. So a lot of the coaching, so at the Institute, we do a lot of research and education. We also do a lot of coaching and advising. And some of the schools we coach and advise are traditional schools or public schools who, especially since COVID, they're running into this realization that we are kind of just churning out dependent learners, and it's not sustainable. And we need to do work to cultivate agency and independence in our students. How do we do that? And so there's obviously barriers in a public school setting. But what we do is help them kind of identify things on the spectrum. Like, where can you open up agency? Where can you open up choice? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Where can you give control away instead of clinging to it? And so we see a very wide spectrum, right, of how these models can lead to increasing learner agency.
What's the general vibe there when you're working with a traditional school and talking about self-direction? Like these things in many ways are kind of like oil and water, right? Like the traditional model is charged with disseminating information at a certain level, at a certain pace, with certain preset accountability factors plugged in already. Like what is that like to work with them and to like try to get these ideas into the system? Because a lot of people that we talk to are like you, they come out of the system and they've like washed their hands of it a little bit. It's like, you can't change it. I tried for decades, so you are going in and trying to influence the system. I think that's really powerful and super interesting. And I'd love to just hear more about your experience. Are people open to that? Or are they coming to you asking for help? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, if they're coming to us, they already know, like they've heard us in this realm. We do kind of put out articles, and we create videos, and we've written books, and so there's we're out kind of pushing the self-directed learning point of view, and so as educators find us, or people in the field find us, they already have that wondering of how do we do this. So our partners range, in terms of school size. We've worked with entire school districts. We've worked with, just one classroom in one school in a district. We've worked with micro schools, so all of that impacts it. What have found a lot of success in is getting teachers in a room together. We kind of coach them through kind of our viewpoint on self-directed learning, why we think it's so important for agency and choice to happen. We get their own stories about kind of their own feeling like a lack of agency themselves, or feeling like they're beholden to something else, and then we find that room to create, and we say like, okay, take something you're planning on doing, maybe it's a lesson, maybe it's something that you have upcoming, let's look at that together, let's workshop it. How are ways that we can start building in some agency here? Maybe that has to do with or do the groups do I get to choose my group? Do I get to choose my modality that I'm working in? Do I get to choose how I'm assessed? Do I get to choose where I'm sitting? Do I get to choose my pace? Do I get to choose my resources that I'm learning from? Can I go research on my own? All of those things, those are small choices. But the more of those that we can hand over to learners, the more involved they're going to feel. So we start there. Like, teacher, this lesson is in your control. Where can you, in the locus of your own classroom, how can you shift that to learners? And then we start thinking culturally broader about what would it look like for more decisions at a school level to be in learners' hands. And then teachers are really good at identifying barriers, right? we can't do this because A, B, C, D, whatever. The next phase of our work is we go to the principals, to the superintendents, to those that have some leverage of control over those barriers. And we say, hey, here are your teachers identified these barriers to increasing learner agency in this school. Which of those are in your control? Right. And so then it gives the school leadership an opportunity to look and say, like, oh, we can, be it class size, be it, time and seat time. Like there are things that school leaders can take and adapt. And so we kind of see it, it's kind of like the sport crew, like rowing, like the more we can get people rowing in the same direction, the deeper the kind of the transformative learning is going to be. So if you can get students bought into like, hey, no, it's really on you to learn. It's on you to do the thing. And if you can get teachers to buy in and say like, okay, it's really on the learners themselves, how can you shift that to them? And then if you can get the school leaders and the parents, there's different kind of stakeholder groups you got to engage and move. But it's possible, and it's not going to be quick. It's going to take time. Like usually most of these partnerships are years long that we're working with schools and school districts. And it's small incremental movement towards agency.
Which of all of those stakeholders is the hardest to convince that self-directed learning is like worth its weight?
Depends a lot on the parents. Some parents would be like, absolutely, yes, I want my kid to have agency. And then, some parents have been a barrier because they, the mindset is, wait, I'm sending my kid to school for y'all to teach them. That's why they're going there. And you're telling me you're not going to teach them, or they have to teach themselves. So there's a mindset shift, right? And so part of it's communicating to parents about what is self-directed learning, what are we doing, what are we opening up. So depending on that, the level of the parent buy-in, they could either be the biggest supporter or they could be not on board at all.
Do you do any parent education or anything around that, or is who you're working with is really the school administration? Like, is there anything that you guys do to try to help shift that paradigm in parents?
So we do a lot of parent coaching at our own school. So at the Forest School, there's a lot of there's onboarding process of like, hey, this is going to look very different than traditional schooling and might be uncomfortable, and let's talk about it. We're very transparent, and we do a lot of throughout the year we're having parent coffees, or we're having multiple kind of scenarios for feedback, for questions. We do a lot of that there. When we're consulting partners, we're usually working with school leaders, but what we're trying to equip school leaders with are the tools and techniques to work with their teachers and to work with parents. So that's, we actually have a book coming out next year. It's called The Playbook for Self-Directed Learning. And it's just like, hey, it's geared for school leaders. And it's like, hey, you want to start a school? Maybe it's a micro school. Maybe you're already a school leader in a maybe more traditional school, but you want to move towards more learner agency. Here's some things to try. Here's a playbook you can follow. And that's with parents, that's with teachers, that's with students.
When you're doing this parent onboarding into the Forest School, what kind of ideas come up? Like what do you really need to help them understand? Maybe if you pick like a top 3 things that you're trying to help these parents like understand and believe in order to get on the self-directed learning support boat.
Yeah, I think one is keeping the end in mind. So we kind of collectively, hold up like, hey, when your kid's 18 and they're walking out of our doors, like what kind of human do you want them to be? Like, what are the things you want them to have gotten practice at in a school setting? And once parents can kind of see that, it's like, oh yeah, sure, there might be some academic stuff sprinkled in there that they want for the kids, but that's usually low on the list. They want their kids to usually be people of strong character, empathetic and confident and creative and hardworking. Like they want character traits. And so once they can kind of identify those, it's easy to say like, okay, in the traditional school environment, how are they working towards those goals versus in this learner-led environment? What kind of practice, what kind of at-bats are they getting at being a good collaborator, at being someone responsible and on time and, a person of their word, a good friend and empathetic and all of those things. And so once you can kind of shape the long view of, this might be messy and it might be hard, but good learning usually is. And it's not in vain. There's an outcome that you're thinking of here. So I think that's one of the more important things is that long-term buy-in. And then we usually say, this isn't scientific, this is like anecdotal, but for every year a learner's been in a traditional setting, we say, it usually takes 1 month with us for them to kind of shake off those habits. So if they're coming in 7th, 8th, ninth grade, it might take a full school year of them really just kind of struggling before they really take hold of like, oh, this is on me to do. So we try to manage expectations there.
Yeah, we see this about the same at Prenda too. When we get kids in from a traditional model, it's kind of the way that I think about it is like they're so used to being pushed that when you stop pushing them, they stand still because they're like, oh, no one's pushing me, so I'm just going to stay here. And it takes them a while to like find their footing in their own direction. They're like looking around thinking like, well, now that it's on me to move, which way do I want to move? How do I move? Like they've got to figure all of that out because they're so used to that push. And part of that figuring things out is kind of a standstill is what I see is like almost like they're paralyzed. Like they don't know what to do. They're radically uncomfortable because they're like, some kids are like, I hate this. Like, I want you to tell me how to win. Like, what are the instructions? How do I play this game? I'm used to winning. And like, that's where I've been getting a lot of my self-efficacy. Like if they were good at school, and then you take that away from them and ask them to, generate some of that themselves. And it's really uncomfortable for them. It really does take time. And that can be scary for parents to watch because they're like, I'm used to these train tracks that are going in a certain direction and moving at this certain clip. And now we're not on the train tracks. We're not moving. Like, by all accounts, this doesn't look like it's working, but like the changes are just so internal and slow. Does that match what you guys see?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of discomfort that we call it the dizziness of freedom. It's like once you have kind of the freedom to choose your work or not to do your work, it's hard to get going. And so I think if you have, each of us, we have thoughts and we have feelings and we have plans, we have things we want to do, we have, thoughts about the world, we have things that we feel are true. But you're in an environment that like doesn't really care about your thoughts, feelings, or plans, right? Like squashes those year after year. What does that do? What does that do to you? What does that do to your spirit? So like to be in a place, I think it's, rehumanizing, like what does it look like to kind of come back to yourself and come back to like, oh, I am a person that has my own interests and desires and things I want to do.
It's almost like I have experienced this as a mother. When I have 4 kids that were like very little and needed me constantly, like my own thoughts, feelings, what I wanted to do, like, how I would spend my time if I wasn't taking care of many children, like all of that got shelved. And then now that my kids are a little older, it's like, oh, like I could, like you kind of go through like a finding yourself again. I don't know if that is applicable, but that's my experience. And the kids go through a finding themselves again if you let them. If you don't, and they're 18 and graduating or going, like that finding themselves gets pushed and pushed and pushed until they're in an environment or a life circumstance where they're able to do that. And it's just so beneficial to give them that when they're young, right?
And it's not just in the school environment, but the home environment, I think, is really important too, because we're talking about like parents can be sometimes that barrier to allow them to get into this self, because I don't want to use the word brainwash, but it's almost like we've been brainwashed. This is the way kids need to learn, but there's so many other ways, and there's a lot of research to support it. So I would love if you could share a little bit about the research that you have done or that you know of that supports this self-directed learning.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. And I think a lot of what we do is more like curating. I think self-directed learning, like the research in the field has been happening for decades. But it's not really had much of there's not been very many people like taking it and translating it out into the public, especially over the past 30, 40 years. Look at the work in self-efficacy or self-determination theory, or these more like science of learning, how the brain works, how kids learn, and this idea of there being a direct tie between you feeling that you have interests, those interests are worth exploring, and that you are able to think through the outcome expectations of like what might happen if I do this or I don't do this. Like what are the real world consequences of an action, and am I capable of doing this or not? So some basic like self-efficacy theory shows deep learning happens when kids are constantly encountering things that are pushing their interest in various ways. Things that both that they're really super interested in and things that are like, oh, I might not be interested in that. And I'm learning that now, and that's great. And I'm learning about my own capability in this thing and where I might need to grow. And I'm learning in, just the natural consequence of what could happen or not happen if I kind of do X or do Y. In our own research, we found that there's a pathway that individuals usually take and kind of leaning into self-directed learning. First, we call phase one like the desire phase. So it's like I'm at a place where actually I want to learn, right? Like I want to know this thing. I'm interested. I'm curious. And usually to be in that phase, kids have to have their needs met, right? So it's like I feel safe. I feel like I belong. I'm at this place where I can explore my interests. Kind of reminds me, Katie, what you just said of being in the mom brain, where it's like, I got too much to worry about me right now, so to really like lean into like being an agentic learner and like following your own interests, you got to be in a place where you have that to give, so I think that's a crucial learning for schools and for parents and for any kind of learning environment, is to being a place where we're meeting kids' needs, and they're starting from a place of safety and belonging. Then once I have that, once I have the desire to learn, I could become a resourceful learner. So we say phase two is kind of building resources. So it's all those things. Maybe it's like the goals I can set, or the things I can explore, the curriculum I can find, the videos I can watch, I can go to YouTube or whatever. And then I start making those hard decisions of like prioritizing, doing the thing, that might not be the most immediately gratifying, but it's going to push me to learn, like start making some of those priority decisions. And then phase three is taking the initiative. And that's like, I'm just going to get started on the project. I'm going to do the thing. I got my resources built. I've kind of thought through some strategies. Now I'm going to do it. And a lot of times, we get stuck there and we hit some resistance and we're like, okay, I'm out. I'm done. So phase four is like this idea of building the persistence, right? Like pushing through challenges and obstacles, pivoting when you need to, reevaluating, reflecting, and kind of getting through the other side. So we've kind of gone through and built from those four phases. Like, here's just some characteristics of people that are in these phases, what they're facing, what their questions might be, what and ways we can kind of support them as they grow. We've built some like surveys we use with their learners around that to help them self-reflect and think through like, am I self-directed, and where am I self-directed? When am I not? When am I paralyzed by fear of choice or by fear of failure? Or I just don't understand, and so reflecting on that, what do I need to move forward? So that's been a lot of our current research, and the goal primarily with the research is to help our own learners at our school kind of be reflective and thoughtful about where they are, and to provide them with tools to move forward, and then sharing that out more broadly with other schools as well.
What does that reflection do? Why is that important that they're self-reflecting?
Yeah, I think there's a John Dewey quote, something that like we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And he uses this example of like running into a rock and bruising my knee, or something. He's like, I learned something there, but if I don't stop and think about what I learned, like what caused the bruise, why did I run into the rock, what would happen if I ran into the rock again, then I haven't really learned anything, So the idea of reflection, I think a lot of education is very content heavy. It's very, what do you remember about these facts that you learned over these few weeks that we've had together, and that's what's assessed, But the reflection piece is a little bit more holistic, like it's like, who am I? Like, who am I as a person? What am I growing in? And what are my current kind of grow points? Like, what could I grow in? What am I kind of weak on? I think that's just a truly invaluable skill to start, or muscle to start building, like that self-awareness piece, that reflection piece with learners.
Helps them develop a strong sense of self, and which it affects you your entire life and the people around you, and it's just like a ripple effect. And what I'm hearing you say as well is what is really important to keep in mind is that we need to give kids space and hold that space for them, and then also guidance. It's not like, oh, they're self-directed, just feed them to the wolves. Just let them do whatever they want. I hear that too. Like, well, we can't just let kids do whatever the heck they want. It's like, no, there's guardrails and we're going to give them guidance, but then we're also giving them space. I think that's really important.
So 2 things that I'm thinking here. Last night I was doing, with my 11-year-old, I was sitting by him while he was doing math, and math is difficult for him. But he's grown a lot in his ability to like stay emotionally regulated through struggle and use his resources. Prenda provides a service where you can click a button and be talking to a math tutor in a few seconds. So instead of coming to me saying, how do I do this? Like, we've provided a resource to be like, yeah, you can definitely get some expert help here, but it's not going to be from me. So he's learning how to do that. Lots of progress there, but he got something wrong. He had done a bunch of math. He also has a hard time with handwriting. I'm actually having him evaluated for dysgraphia soon because it's just such a point of like shame for him. It's so hard. And so he's trying to write his numbers so he can do math. And then he's getting the math wrong because he can't read his numbers. And he's so frustrated. And he scribbles out his math that was wrong. And I'm like, no, why did you scribble that out? Like, we're going to go back to that and learn from that to see, like, that's part of the reflecting process. Just like, look at what went wrong. And I'm like, oh, we scribbled this out. So now we can't actually learn. Like, and that was just a good moment for him to both see is like, oh, my mistakes are valuable. Like, that was like, there was a loss there because we don't want to cover up or get rid of our mistakes. We want to look at them and ask questions about them and correct our thinking. And that's part of like, Piaget constructivism. Like, I need to make concrete objects out of all of these abstract ideas in my brain so that I can really personally hold them and manipulate them and make meaning out of my world. From the things that I experience and reflect on. I just think that that's one of the main reasons that this whole approach works so well, because in a traditional model, like, you would just get a red X, right? Like, there has to be this removal of like shame from mistakes and judgment from mistakes, and replaced by feedback and reflection.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is such a better teacher, right? That whole idea of, like failure is the best teacher. But it's true. And helping kids embrace it and not see it as like something to be ashamed of. It's like, oh, okay, I didn't get the right thing, but like celebrating that. And then helping them see that as like this huge learning moment, So like there's culture building there that happens, when you're doing it as a classroom, as a group. So how do you, help educators kind of have a mind for like, hey, like, let's build on the things like our misses along the way, collectively, and celebrate a culture of doing that, and then encourage kids to, be courageous and be confident and in doing the wrong thing and learning from it, doing a little bit better next time. That idea of like progress, not perfection. I think is really important.
So what do you think is the role of the adults here? Obviously, this is a very different environment, very different goals, very different methods. Talk me through, at Prenda, we call them guides, but the adult in the room, what's their job? How do they get that job done?
I think like the base level goal, like the base level role is just safety, right? So like an adult there is just safety. That's the first promise we always make to learners and their families is like, hey, we're going to keep you safe. And we're going to have that mindset. And then when it comes to education, I think one of the goals is to be out of the way as much as possible. I think that, with the kind of teacher-centered education model, it's like the teacher is front and center. They're doing the most. If the teacher wasn't there, chaos would ensue. The role of a guide or facilitator of self-directed learning, they should be kind of on the periphery. They should be able to be in and out. I think a couple of their key kind of buckets of, we call it knowledge, craft, and skills. So like the things you need to know, the things you got to be able to do, that are the skills are kind of things that could carry over into other fields or other jobs. Just interpersonal skills, communications, that sort of stuff. But then the craft is like very guide specific, like those sorts of things that are really crucial to be able to do. And so we take a Socratic guiding approach. So it's not seeing the adult as the holder of information or the answers, but someone who's a resource or a tool that can help, just through kind of Socratic guiding, helping learners find or know how to think more deeply about a problem or where to find answers or help. I think we see our guides or educators, we call them game makers. So thinking about ways to, as the adult in the room, you can think through how do I make this a place where kids want to be, they're having fun. The rules are clear, like it's same as a game. Like there's rules we agree on. The kids can make those rules. There's spectrums there. But how do I make this a fun game that kids want to play and they opt into playing, and we're learning from it. So we kind of build our learning design into the game making philosophy. We talk about guides being those like role models of like modeling what is curiosity, what is empathy, what is how are you sharing yourself, your full self, kind of in this space in a way that kids can see like, oh, that person is somebody I could see myself kind of wanting to go through processes. They're wanting to learn stuff. They're interested. Those sorts of things.
I think that's a really powerful point that you're making, the power of example, because kids are always looking to the adults that care for them for their cues, right? They're taking their cues from the adults in their life. And it's important that we're setting an example, not only in like our kind of like on stage time when we know kids are watching us, but like, what do we do in our free time? Like they're never like, oh, the bell hasn't rung yet, so I'm not being influenced by the example of my teacher, but like, what is the attitude of the adults in their lives around meaningful, authentic work? Are we trying to avoid work? Is learning something that we do passionately because we love it? Do we feel like learning is a chore that is yucky and like distasteful, right? Like those are kind of the things that are going to transfer more than, what we do when we're in teacher mode or in parent mode.
Yeah, I agree. So, I think it's kind of cultivating in, in the adults, the things that you're going to cultivate.
Yeah, so much of it is subconscious and nonverbal too. We think about what we're telling them, but what Katie said, there's so many cues that the child brain is constantly interpreting. And like you said, with that safety, or am I safe? That's not, they're asking themselves if they're safe. That is like their bodies and their brains, assessing if the environment is safe. I was listening to a podcast once. I can't remember her name. It's
Sarah McKenzie.
Yes, there we go. I was listening to her and she said she goes and speaks at conferences and always asks, okay, how many of you struggle with your kids wanting to read? And like everyone puts their hands up. How many of you read? Like in front of your kids? No hands go up. And she said, okay, this is what we need to start with. Like example is so powerful. And, we want our kids to do all these things and be engaged and go through these different levels of self-directed learning. However, if we're not learners ourselves, like we keep circling back to this, environment is really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. So I think the educator has a role to play in that modeling, right? One of my favorite things to do as an educator when I was in the classroom would just be like, yeah, have a book and I'm reading, right? And you're seeing that, not as a way to get out of work, but as a way of like, hey, we're having reading time as a group. I'm expecting you to go choose a book and read. Like I'm gonna sit here and read too, and you're seeing that.
We just saw in the NAEP scores that came out, it was like something abysmal. It was like 12% or 17% of kids are choosing to read in their free time, like at least once a month or something like that. It's just like, oh my gosh. Like
that's so hard for me to even fathom because my kids literally, we go to the library, I think every 4 days, but we don't turn our TV on Monday through Friday and we don't have access to video games. So I just feel like there's so many other things that are competing for our kids' attention for sure.
I don't know if you've realized this, but you are not normal. So
I had to share this really quick. So yesterday, my youngest, he's 6, and we were talking about, kids at school. And because he goes to a Montessori, it's very self-directed. And some of these kids sit and do nothing. And their parents are like, I don't think this is going to work because they need more structure. And, they're not doing anything. They're not learning anything. And I was talking to one of the moms and I told her, I said, yeah, but like, what are you guys doing at home too? Because this is at home, my son is constantly engaging and learning, but he has the freedom and the space to do so. So I asked him, I said, so does this one boy, does he just, sit and do nothing? He was like, yeah. I said, do you know if he like plays video games at home? And he said, Mom, I'm like the only kid that's not allowed to watch TV whenever I want to. He said, it's just not fair. I said, oh, why isn't it fair? He goes, it's not fair to them because they're not getting the things they need for their brains to develop. I was like, we are not normal at all. But I love it because he's always creating and building, and he's just taps into these interests. But it's because his brain isn't it's there. He doesn't have as much competition with it constantly stimulating it. He can just sit and be bored and look. Right now I told Katie this yesterday, we have paper weapons all over my house made out of popsicle sticks and glue guns, and there's glue. I keep finding like the glue strings everywhere. I'm not telling him what to learn or what, to make these things. And I love to, he'll come to me and say, Mom, I didn't follow any instructions. Like that's a value, I guess, that we're instilling in them. Like I created this all from my own brain. I did this myself. So it's really cool to see how excited a 6-year-old, but I know too, like, I don't know if we could talk about like the slump that we see in creativity in kids. They say right around 4th grade is where they're not as like engaged in getting excited to learn.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And so I think when you're talking about the role of the teacher, you're also thinking about like what is the interplay between the learning environment and home environment, what's being modeled at home. That goes back to that rowing metaphor, like if we're talking self-directed here, but that's not happening at home, then there's going to be the learner is going to be kind of at this confusing.
Another good analogy there is like planting a seed in like some self-directed soil and then taking it out every day and putting it in a different kinds of soil and putting it back. It's like the seed's never going to grow.
It's like never going to germinate.
Like have all their environments where like their beliefs and what they see are all lining up, and then they're like, okay, this is like reliable,
Yeah. So I think that's just a variable in it, and something as educators just be mindful of, like those kids we have in our classes that might be struggling to take up the responsibility of learner-led education. A lot of that is because they're getting all these cross mixed signals, so they just might need more support at home. The parents might need some more coaching, some more resources.
Can you tell us some stories of kids that you've seen go through this transition? Like, can you think of some examples of like kids who did nothing and then what happened to like get them in? Like, tell me some stories. I'm sure you've seen a lot of kids in the forest school who have ridden this train. I'd love to hear.
We've seen lots of kids. It's one of our first graduates. He came into the forest school as like we were launching that as a 9th grader, but we didn't really have a high school yet. So he kind of just hung out with the middle school kids. But he went through a period of time where, probably for a year or something, he would just like hide away and watch Netflix. Like he just had a computer and like he just watched TV. And then we got to a place where we were talking with him. We're like, hey, you want to be an engineer? Like you want to go to Georgia Tech, which is a really hard school to get into. And here's kind of the stuff you need to have before then. Like, what's your plan? And so there's this like light bulb moment of like, oh, I've like wasted not wasted, but I've chosen to kind of be entertained by whatever for a year, and now I have to kind of make some other choices. And then he just like cranks, right? Like he just took on, like started dual enrollment courses, AP courses, just taught himself all kinds of upper level, did calculus without ever having a math teacher, like all those things. And is now in his 2nd or 3rd year at Georgia Tech. But like we see that all the time, where it's like those moments of, especially kids that they come into the school, and then maybe they are really good at school, or they're what we would call high achieving kids in another kind of environment, and they're like, oh, I don't have to do anything, so nobody's pushing me, so I'm going to take a break. But again, it's kind of formulating that, like, where do you want to be when you walk out of these doors? What are the things that are going to have to be done? Like if you're going to want to go into a higher ed kind of situation, you're going to have to do some stuff. Like what are you going to do if you're going to go into a career? You're going to have to do some stuff. What do you want to do? So helping them think through those things. But yeah, we have learners. We have learners that are graduating early. We have a 16-year-old who's heading out into the world because they just wanted to get done early, so they finished high school in like 2 years, 3 years. We have here's an interesting story. We had a high schooler who this year, so they were with us for the past 5 years, and then they wanted to go to like a traditional kind of high school. A lot of it was around this idea of like they want to be in the medical profession, and they felt like they were struggling to teach themselves math. And they're like, I really just need somebody to teach me math. I need a math teacher. I need to go to a school. And so this, since August, they've been in a local high school, and they are so bored and just so over it. They're coming back in January. They're like, this is a waste of my time. I'm sitting. They already have like 70 absences just because they count like every class in absence. Just they're like they're late. They're missing. They're like, I can't come and go as I please. I'm able to like go faster teaching myself this stuff than like classes. And so we kind of see that carryover between kids that sure, they can go to another high school and do fine, but they're going to be bored, and they're going to feel that lack of freedom and choice.
I think that's a really good tip for parents too. And I've definitely done, I have an 8th grader and he is non-conforming. He he has to see the point in what he's doing. And thankfully he's in an environment that supports that as best that it can. And so whenever like we get into like, okay, dude, you're 20 assignments behind, or like what's going on? And I'm like, what do you want to do with life? He wants to go to Embry-Riddle. That's a hard school to get into. That's, he wants to go into aeronautics. Like and he has it in him. But instead of me saying, okay, I'm not going to get in a fight with you about it, it's you have to decide, do I really want that? If you do, you have to figure out how to get there. We'll support you. We're here to support you, but you have to make that decision on your own. And so I feel like that's just a really good tip for parents to start with that purpose and lead with like the end in mind, or like kind of like, okay, this is what you're interested in. This is what you're passionate in. And then use that to help motivate, the kids too, or help them tap into their intrinsic motivation of how, why this matters.
Yeah, I think that's wise. I think, adults, we do that. We don't like, I'm not going to go learn geometry just to learn geometry, right? I might kind of learn some geometry if I need to like do a carpentry project or something. I'm like, oh, how do I measure these angles again? Let me refresh myself on that. But it needs to be tied to a real goal I have or a real objective I have. So I think helping kids think about learning the same way, as this is it might feel imposed like arbitrarily that you have to learn these things, but let's think through where you want to go and what you want to do. And so we help each kid set goals, those kind of big goals that they want. And then what we help them reflect on, and this is helpful for parents, is think through like, okay, at my current pace, am I on track to meet those goals? Am I going to finish those goals early, or am I lagging behind those goals? And why?
Part of that self-reflection piece.
And we don't cast judgment on that. It's not like, oh, you're behind on your goals, so like you're a terrible person. It's like, oh, you're behind on your goals, so maybe you're at the forest school an extra year, right? And or something like that, or maybe you're working over something like, there's a consequence to not meeting those goals, but that consequence is for you to choose.
And it isn't adult judgment. It's not a grade, not like, this is literally a thing that you are going to choose and that you are going to experience. And when they feel the weight of that and like the non-arbitrariness of that, like that really puts them into action.
Yeah, I think that's a great motivator, is like when they feel the weight of like, oh, it is on me. Nobody's going to do it for me.
Yeah, and it's not a weight of fear like, I'm not going to get a good grade. It's like, oh, I'm not going to get this actual real thing in the real world. It's not arbitrary. This is reminding me of a story that our founder, Kelly Smith, tells about the first year he ran a pilot micro school and then started a full micro school the next semester. And so one of our early Prenda kids, we do a project called Future You, explain it to Future You. And so all of the kids come in and they make like a future self. Like right now it's like a dream board kind of thing, but back then it was like a sculpture, like a real thing, like make your future self. And then anytime there was any lack of motivation, like the guide's role was just to be like, you can definitely watch Netflix or like do whatever. Like you need to go have a conversation with Future You, like go over to your sculpture and explain your today choice to your future self. Like that's who you're accountable to. And so this kid made his future self out of like Play-Doh or something. And it was just him sitting on a couch watching TV, eating chips. And that was like his vision for his future, right? And Kelly just comes in. He's like, that's awesome. That's going to be such a great future. Who's going to pay for the chips? And then just asking that question, just like, oh, that makes me realize that I'm going to be an adult, that I'm going to be having to provide for myself. And how do I want to do that? And like spiraled this kid on this big like discovery quest. And he discovered that he actually wants to be a pediatric oncologist. So changed his future self just by asking questions and helping him realize, like, you are actually going to grow up. Time is going to go past. And it's hard because in that developmental phase, their prefrontal cortexes are not super good at projecting themselves deep into time and tying their future or their now actions to their future results. So I think that's one of the key roles the adult can play, because we have a fully functioning prefrontal cortex, and it's not very many years between being an 8th or 9th grader and being out on your own. Really, in the grand scheme of things, it feels like such a long time when you're a kid, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not very long. So just giving kids an opportunity to look in the mirror a little bit and have those moments in a gentle, non-judgmental way, of course. And to say, hey, and we're here to support you in making this plan and to continue to Socratically help you think through this. But it's just powerful. It's really powerful what you can do for just every individual, helping every individual decide to learn and to grow in the capacity and capability to learn, to accomplish what they want to do. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I like that future you. That's good. We call it holding up a mirror, right? This idea of like, so I, as a guide, as an educator, what I'm doing is just kind of reflecting back to you, right? Like I'm just reflecting your current work or where you're at, your progress. It's on you to think about. I can help you think about it, but it's on you to think about and course correct and all of those. But I'm just going to hold up a mirror and say like, hey, this is where we're at. What do you think? What are we going to do from here? And then I think too, also as adults, we have those experiences we can speak on. I think kind of having those discussions with learners about like, hey, here's like a choice I didn't make. I didn't make a best choice here in my life when I should have been preparing for this and I didn't, or I learned this lesson the hard way, and kind of sharing those moments too. Just to kind of keep our own stories fresh in the minds of learners as well.
Absolutely. Well, we have had such a great conversation with you. This is so good. I love the work that you're doing, and not just going, okay, it has to be in these micro schools or these, small private schools, but self-directed education can happen in traditional environments as well. So I applaud you and all the work that you're doing. And this is a question we ask all of our guests. So who is someone who has kindled your love of learning, curiosity, motivation, like your passion, or kind of like where you are today and how you view the world?
Well, I'm gonna say my parents, just because they're awesome people, and they deserve more credit and shout outs than I could ever give them, probably. But I think my dad, in one way, like to the reading example, like he legitimately gets maybe 3 or 4 books at the library every week, like, and just reads them. So like my memories growing up is like my dad in his armchair just like reading books, and that was always really powerful. And then my mom has always been someone who's just like a kind of self-driven kind of creator type person of just like, I'm going to learn how to garden. I'm going to do this. Like, and I think a lot of that with her upbringing was more survival. Like, we have lots of mouths to feed. We need to learn how to do all this stuff. Kind of growing up in rural Appalachia, she kind of takes that mindset to like, she has a great confidence in herself to be able to go and do things and help people. It's usually for a cause. So I think those two people kind of, set examples for just moving through the world in confidence and curiosity and empathy.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. How can listeners learn more about your work?
Yeah, you can visit our website at selfdirect.school. So that's our Institute for Self-Directed Learning. We have links there to lots of YouTube channels. You could go to YouTube and look at our channel at selfdirect.school as well. And there's videos on kind of every facet of kind of self-directed school design. We do a couple of training courses. I'm actually recruiting. If there's any school leaders out there interested in a course called Creating Pathways to Innovation. So we're looking at school leaders that are currently feeling stuck where they are. And we kind of walk them through how to cultivate that soil and make it a place that can shift towards more innovative learning. You can find those opportunities at our website. We'll be doing that in the spring.
I will definitely be referring you to my son's principal, because he is really trying to do all of these things within the school system to prove to other educators, hey, we can do this in the system. And so I definitely will be referring him to you. Thank you for telling us all about the work that you're doing. I mean, it's making a big difference in lots of kids' lives. And yeah, thank you for coming on Kindled.
Yeah, thanks for having me. y'all are really great, and I appreciate this resource, the podcast, and then, with what you do in Prenda, it's an awesome opportunity as well. So thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah, fun to chat.
That's it for today. We hope you learned something new today in today's episode. And if you did, can you please go on to wherever you listen to your podcast and leave a review? That really helps other people find the podcast and be able to listen to these awesome interviews. Also, you can subscribe and follow us on social at Prenda Learn. If you have any questions you would like for us to address on the podcast, just email us at podcast@prenda.com. You can also join us on our Facebook group, which is called the KindlED Collective. And you can sign up for our weekly newsletter that Kaity writes with very easy to follow tips for parents, for educators, and it's called The Sunday Spark.
The Kindle podcast is brought to you by Prenda. Prenda makes it easy for you to start and run an amazing microschool based on all of the ideas and principles that we talk about here on the Kindle podcast. If you want more information about guiding a Prenda microschool, just go to prenda.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to keep kindling.